Now, on her first visit to Africa since she was appointed UK International Development Secretary, Priti Patel has told the BBC major multinational aid funding may be cut unless it provides better value for money, better value that is, for British taxpayers. More than $4 billion of the UK aid goes to global organisations such as the World Bank. The BBC's James Landell reports.
This is how humanitarian aid is delivered these days. Not with a bag of flour or rice, but via a payment card that gives these Kenyan women £20 a month, hard cash from the British taxpayer that allows them to buy the food they need to survive. It is the International Development Secretary who ultimately funds these cards, and we travelled with Priti Patel as she visited Kenya for the first time in her new role, seeing what some of her £12 billion budget is supporting on the ground.
This might look like a familiar scene. A British International Development Secretary seeing how British aid is being spent in Africa. But this is a bit different because in the past Priti Patel has been critical of some aid spending. So the question is, what's she going to do differently?
We have to make sure that our aid works in our national interest and also that it works for our taxpayers. Much more openness, much more transparency and much more accountability.
And her targets are the big multinational aid organisations that spend money on Britain's behalf. She's about to publish a review of their work, and she told me that if they don't meet new performance targets by spending better and wasting less, she'll cut off their funding.
The government's approach is focused on ensuring that we drive taxpayer value. So when it comes to multilateral organisations, focus on performance agreements. If they are not performing, then obviously we'll look at the contributions that we give to them. We need to be challenging.
The sort of agencies she's talking about are the World Bank and the EU and other smaller bodies. They spend 40% of Britain's aid budget, more than £4.5 billion. On the one hand, they can spend money on a large scale with real impact in refugee camps like this one in northern Kenya. But on the other hand, some can also waste money too. In the port of Mombasa is another side of the story, where British aid is being given directly to boost economic development, the kind of bilateral aid that Ms Patel wants to use to secure new trade deals and make new allies in the World Trade Organization that Britain will need after Brexit.
British soft power is exactly where DFID and our aid and other relationships around the world can come together to deliver in our national interest and deliver for Britain when it comes to free trade arrangements, free trade agreements, but also life post-Brexit.
So Priti Patel is promising much. The question is whether her reforms will genuinely change Britain's aid spending or merely rebrand it with new targets and a focus on trade. For women and children like these, the answer will matter. James Landell, BBC News in northern Kenya.
Well, I'm now joined by Martin Drewry, who's the director at Health Poverty Action, a non-profit organisation based here in London. Martin, should aid organisations and recipients be worried by this threat?
Well, the first thing to say is that any recipient of public funds should be held accountable. So to review the spending of the World Bank absolutely needs to be done. To review the spending of anyone spending any public finance, it absolutely should be held accountable. What worries us about this is the language it's been framed in. So as we speak, as we know, a child is dying unnecessarily because of poverty every 5 seconds. And for the person who is responsible for the UK's aid budget to be saying that we need to be making this money deliver for us, deliver for Britain, deliver to further our own national interest, that seems morally suspect to me.
And that's a line of particular interest because what exactly does she want aid agencies to do with this money so that it benefits the UK taxpayer?
Well, that's the question, because she doesn't really say. What she says is the money needs to deliver for the UK taxpayer, deliver in our interest. Now, I'm a UK taxpayer. I'm a UK citizen. I've lived here all my life. My greatest interest is I want my children to grow up in a fairer, safer world, that the kind of conflict that we've been seeing in the reports prior to this reduces, not increases. And to see aid as an instrument of our soft power in the world to further our interests. What kind of a world is it going to be if every donor in the world does that?
Well, but there's also been the accusation against aid agencies of being self-serving, you know, up to 40% self-serving, you know, big white SUVs across African, driving across Africa is where a lot of that money goes to. Surely you should be held accountable.
We absolutely should, absolutely should. And those that work in organisations like the NGOs certainly see some of the money that's wasted by some of the bigger agencies. And often it's wasted because it's not furthering the interests of the poorest. It's ultimately making the world a fairer place is making the power relationships more fair. People don't choose to be in poverty. People are forced into poverty. And if we're going to see the aid spending as a way of furthering the power of the powerful, that's not going to end well.
There's also the argument that aid is not really the answer to alleviating poverty in places like Africa.
Exactly, and it's not. We at Health Poverty Action see aid more as a form of compensation because each year far more is taken out of Africa than flows back into it through aid. The UK aid budget is £12 billion. Over the next 10 years, $580 billion is going to be taken out of Africa. So it's clamping down on things like tax dodging, closing down the tax havens. Those are the kinds of things that are needed if we're serious about ending poverty.
Martin Drewry from Health Poverty Action, thanks a lot for coming into the studio to talk to